Backlogs at the Social Security Administration's processing centers are on the rise, with the backlog growing by more than 1.5 million cases. The Office of Inspector General says the number of pending cases has risen because of staffing and overtime funding shortfalls. We get details now from Deputy Assistant IG Mark Seawright. Mr. Seawright, good to have you with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And just outline the problem here. These are processing center pending cases. What are the types of cases and what's going on generally? What are these cases that they're getting behind on?
So most of the cases here are something that started at the field office or a teleservice center where a beneficiary called in is either asking for a benefit or where SSA has actually identified that someone's receiving too much of a benefit, but it has to go back and be finalized and reviewed. These are very complex cases that require special attention.
So these are things that can't be solved online or by the normal automated processes that Social Security has in place.
Correct. And they also can't be processed at the field office or at the teleservice centers. So they go to the processing centers that have specialized personnel.
And how many of these processing centers does Social Security operate?
So Social Security operates 8 of the processing centers. 2, though, are specialized. So roughly there are 6 that will take these type of cases on.
And is most of the work by paper or is the information mostly online? I mean, are they handling paper at these centers?
They're not really handling paper from our understanding. Most of it is still in a computer, but they do have to get sometimes a form from someone or validate information.
All right. And just, run through the numbers for us. You've looked at the pending cases over a period of 6 years ending last year. What did you find in terms of quantities?
Yeah, so we did identify that 4 of those 6 years, SSA was able to actually meet their performance measure. However, that led to, as you mentioned, the 1.4 million increase in pending transactions at the processing centers across that time period. We reviewed 139 cases and found that 43% of those cases had been pending for 500 days or longer.
And you said, too, that it went up by 1.4 million. What's the total of pending cases they've got now?
At the end of our audit, it was roughly around 4.3 million in 2023.
And what is their annual goal? To have zero or just to keep the backlog from growing?
Their goal, the way they explained to us, their goal was to determine how many receipts were going to be coming in a year. And then based on the staffing and the overtime that they were able to fund, how many cases could they actually complete? So it's not technically a goal to limit or reduce it. It's more of a goal just to say, how much work are we going to be able to do this year? And then what would be the outcome?
Got it. And the other question was the number of backlogged cases seemed to fluctuate and it reached a peak. It looked pandemic related. I guess we can relate a lot of things to 2020, but it seems like that was one of their worst years.
We didn't dig into that as to whether it was pandemic related. We did notice that in 2022, they did have a large drop off in staffing. They lost almost 400 staff members at their processing centers. Obviously, not having staff and then also being limited in how much overtime they can give those staff leads to their inability to process as many receipts.
All right. We're speaking with Mark Seawright. He is the Deputy Assistant IG for Audits at the Social Security Administration. So they're aware of this. I mean, they probably agree with you this is not a good trend.
Yes, they did. They did agree with our findings and our recommendations. Our recommendations were focusing very much on developing a workload and staffing plan to help them reduce the pending transactions, and then also to establish goals for each of the types of transactions for a time period to make sure that they don't pen for too long. Their feedback to us, though, was, although they agree, they do need more funding and they need steady funding so that they can hire, they can train the employees, and then they can make information technology improvements at the processing centers.
And you also found, too, that not only were the cases backlogged, but there were erroneous occurrences that increased their level of improper payments.
So it wasn't that there was erroneous based on the pending. The issue that we found was it was just being delayed. So, for example, one of our examples in the report is about an overpayment where a beneficiary, SSA on their own, determined that a beneficiary who was receiving disability payments had received over 4 months $9,000 in overpayment. However, it took SSA over 2 years to finalize their review of that transaction, at which case that overpayment then ballooned to $62,000. So although, they identified it initially, because of the pending backlog, it really ballooned and made that overpayment extremely a lot for that beneficiary.
And you mentioned that you examined 130 cases. Do you feel that's a number that is projectable across the 4.6 or 4.4 million cases that are pending? And therefore, do you have some sense of what their improper payments might be stemming from this big number of pending cases?
Yeah, we did. We reviewed 139. We worked with our statistician, and they provided us that number that said that would be projectable or allow us to project across the population.
And so what could the total improper payments be as a result of not getting these things resolved in a timely way?
Again, that's the $1.1 billion that we felt that, by the time that they finished processing those pending transactions, the improper payments had ballooned up to the $1.1 billion.
And did you look at all into why the 400 people suddenly vanished? Why were they fleeing the agency?
No, we did not get into the staffing issues on this audit.
But staffing issues seems to be something that is kind of dogging them for some time now.
According to SSA, yes, they've been having staffing issues.
And did they indicate, or did you indicate, the agency is on a customer experience drive? And, Commissioner O'Malley has meetings to look at statistics and trying to have a metrics-driven organization, I think a practice he's well known for. And did you assess this in terms of customer experience with such a high percentage of cases pending for hundreds of days or even more than a year in some cases?
We did not get into that. The majority of our work was done before Commissioner O'Malley actually arrived and had set up his security stat process.
Got it. But I imagine this must play into this. I mean, in the reaction and the ongoing response to the report, let's say, is stemming from the new administration. Fair to say?
I would say that is, but I would rather let SSA speak specifically for what they're focusing on.
Well, not to put words in yours or his mouth. So what happens next? I mean, the report is out there. You get the sense that they want to get on it and try to staff up and knock down that number.
Yes. Our experience in talking with, the deputy commissioners over there, this is high on their radar, and they definitely are focusing on how can they reduce that pending backlog or at least keep it where it doesn't keep growing.
Mark Seawright is Deputy Assistant Inspector General at the Social Security Administration. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to his report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.